This series is going to be called What Stanford Never Taught Me. I'm Ryan, a current Stanford junior, and I'm studying at Stanford University in the US. I'm a human biology major, trying to become a doctor. And what I'm really trying to do in this series is show a lot of the things that I've learned over the past 2 to 3 years being at Stanford, being surrounded by a lot of other students, and starting to understand a little bit of how Stanford's culture works and putting that in a bigger perspective of what I wish Stanford had taught me and what it actually teaches you and what it will never teach you. So stay tuned to get the full story. We're going to first start off talking about just college in general. And this is from a US perspective, but really what has changed with college over the years. So if we think about the old days, maybe like my parents' generation or their parents' generation, college was a way to differentiate yourself from the vast majority of people. In that if you got a college education, that signaled that you had a higher training and a higher level skill set and a higher intellect than other people, which could then funnel you into higher paying jobs as a result of that. However, in the US, what has happened now is that colleges have sprung up all over the place. So now it's like the default for a lot of people is actually to go to college. Why do I bring this up? The reality is that, in the beginning when it started, it was a scarcity. And that's why everybody's pushing for you to go to college, because it means something, because it's a way to differentiate yourself from all the other people that are applying for these jobs. Being pre-med, I have the luxury of going to medical school and not really having to worry about this, but I have multiple friends, and I've seen it time and time again of people who are competing for jobs, in their junior year of college or even in their sophomore year, trying to get that internship that will lead to their job later on. And I've just noticed a lot of different dynamics that I'm trying to share with you. But the truth is now college, yes, there's still a lot of people maybe not a lot, but some people who don't go to college at all. And in a sense, if you have a college degree, that will differentiate you from that pool of people. And I'm all talking about from an employer's perspective. If from an employer's perspective, if I have someone who has a college degree and someone who doesn't, I at least know for the college degree that there's some level of filtering out. I know that this person, maybe had some sort of training, they did something, because it's very difficult if they don't have the college degree to determine, okay, what did they do with that time? And this is where you have an other part of the equation, which is like, if somebody didn't do anything with their time and just worked, let's say, those kind of high school jobs that you typically work, like maybe at a fast food restaurant, they just did that for like 4 years, versus somebody with a college degree, versus somebody who maybe doesn't have a college degree, but they were able to get a lot of hands-on technical training through internships or other things like that. Those are actually 3 different scenarios for an employer. Right? Because the employer wants to hire somebody that's not going to cause a lot of issues, that's actually going to know what they need to do and be very skilled. So for that first person who just worked a fast food job, their skill set that they've grown and learned is very minimal, unless they've risen to the ranks of, let's say, an operation manager of a franchise. So for example, think about somebody running their own entire McDonald's versus just being a worker. That's very different. But if we compare now the college person to the other person who doesn't have the degree, there is still a risk factor in that you're betting on the interview of that person without the degree to prove their skills, versus you try to assume that the person with the college degree will have the skills. Now, why do I emphasize the word assume? The reality is that's not always the case. We assume that in today's world, that college professors, the university teaching system is going to somehow educate us on the most advanced topics to the most advanced degree that we need for our jobs. And I'm talking broadly of if you're trying to go into any industry, you assume that if you go to college, you will learn those things that you need for your industry. But oftentimes, that doesn't always happen. It depends on the industry and depends on which school you go to. But I'm just going to talk from my personal experience being at Stanford is that a lot of the benefits of going to a top school are not necessarily being taught. It's not really what you actually learn, as in in a classroom, the subject matter you learn. Because now with the internet, you're watching me, you can watch thousands of videos on things. And we're talking about a pure knowledge base level of who knows more. You can learn so much more on the internet in a much better, more efficient way. There are people who are really good at explaining on YouTube. There are people who make really interactive websites that your professor could never do. They can do a way better job of actually educating you and putting knowledge into your brain. But this gets into another problem I'll talk about later with why college is such a hairy kind of issue, because it's tied into all these different levels of employment, kind of status and all that stuff. But I want to come back to just what we start off with. In the old, let's say, maybe 20 to 30 years ago, College degrees were ways to signal that you had certain skill sets, you were educated, and you were like professional, and you were able, this was a good sign for you to join the professional working industry. And this is why employers, especially in the US and probably around the world, really valued a college education. I'm not saying that's changed, I'm just saying that's what happened. Currently, what's the difference? Currently, the difference is now I think a lot more people have college educations because it's kind of filtered down. So now everybody has believed that, okay, we all need to get college degrees, and so a lot more people have them. Now the question then becomes, okay, if everybody has a college degree, how is the employer going to differentiate? They're going to differentiate by brand name, by like who went to a better college than the other person. And this is all relative in that, like what I'm trying to say is that they only do brand name for probably the top 20 colleges in the US. After that, maybe top 30, top 40. After that, I feel like, a lot of them just kind of get mixed together. As in like they're just, colleges, and then they're just certified as like, okay, this is a college, right? They got a degree. There's nothing super crazy or special about it. Like if you went to, let's say, Harvard or Stanford and you got a degree from there, that's something that like pops and stands out to a potential employer. And it's like a very good kind of green flag because it signals that you're likely highly accomplished, you're highly motivated. It signals a lot of different things. And that's also why I want to talk about a college degree is that like it's really a sign of like two things. One, status in a different way than you might think, but also just like it's a brand and it just signals that you've been filtered out. And the jobs are assuming that it's good for you to be filtered out and be at the top 1%. But I'll talk a little bit about admissions too, but it's just like, you're all being compared on your grades and your extracurriculars and things. So we'll get to if that's really a good way to filter people out. But anyway, currently, job market in the US really sucks. It's really difficult to get a job. Lots of people getting laid off. There's concerns about AI replacing people, all sorts of things. And now it's like people with college degrees, people with master's degrees, even people with PhDs are really struggling to find jobs. And so I think it comes down to the question of not if you have a college degree, but what kind of college degree do you have? From what kind of university? Because I can almost guarantee you that people at the top universities getting these certain college degrees from the top schools are probably not struggling to find certain jobs, right? Maybe they don't get the exact job they want, but they could still land a very successful job relatively easily. And so we've shifted to where originally in the old days, college degrees were a scarcity, and there was such a scarcity that people with them were now being super valued, to now that since most people have a college degree, we're reaching another echelon of that level where now they're filtering and looking at really only the people from top schools. And so that means what happens if you're not in that top group? Well, there's a lot of things that can happen. And again, this is all dependent on the type of industry you go to. For example, if you want to become a lawyer, if you want to become a doctor, you need to get college degrees because that's just how the system works. And you can try to beg all you want, but you're not going to become a doctor if you don't already have an undergraduate degree, and that's just how it works because you're not going to get into medical school, right? And there's different ways around that, but for the most part, it's just easier to just go with the flow. But I'm talking about like other jobs, maybe like business, finance, marketing, those kind of things, maybe even computer science, where sometimes it's very outcome-based. And you start to question, okay, if I go to college, what am I learning and who am I learning it from? There are so many exceptions to what I'm saying, but I'm just putting this as like a seed in your head. Think about a lot of these professors. I would say some professors have a lot of experience with maybe actually running their own business, with actually doing marketing themselves, but a lot of them are also very theoretical. And this happens a lot with like economics and those types of things. I have a friend who went into like, investment banking, and I know a lot of people who took economics here at Stanford, and they're really good for kind of research. But we're talking about practicality, right? And like across other places too. We're talking about practicality. We're not talking about, can you repeat all these different things from the textbook? Well, it's like, okay, how many of those things in the textbook are actually going to be used on your first day on the job? That's what matters, right? Because that's what is going to actually help you succeed in your job. And the truth is most colleges aren't effectively teaching you exactly what you need for your job. Because why? Because the college curriculums have been in place for a long time. And the rate at which they're making new classes and the rate at which professors are changing their curriculum and what they're teaching is not fast enough with the rate at the world is changing at. Like if you think about all this kind of AI stuff, okay, well, if we imagine that colleges should be teaching us all the stuff we need to know going forward, then why is it that every college in the US doesn't have something about AI or doesn't have multiple classes about AI in every single field that they teach? I know for a fact they don't have that. And the reason is because most college curriculums don't change that fast. And so now if you think about, okay, so they don't change that fast. That means in a sense they're outdated. Not all of them, but some of them, they're outdated. Sometimes the knowledge is the same, but sometimes it does matter if you're relevant, right? For example, for marketing, there's a lot of new tools out there that are changing how people market things. And that is something you want to pay attention to and you want to learn. And that colleges are probably not going to teach you. And so if you look at that, you're like, okay, wow, that's a really good insight now. So the world is changing at a rapid pace. Employers are always going to be looking for actual tangible skills. And so now we're going to talk about a shift into kind of the future. And we're seeing a little bit of this now. Now employers are understanding that, okay, sometimes colleges, aren't necessarily the best at differentiating people. They're still looking at, top schools, people from the top, let's say 40 to 50 colleges in the US, maybe even 60 or so. And they're saying, okay, that's a good filter mechanism. Like these people from those colleges should be pretty reputable, should be pretty good. However, there's another aspect, which is internships. So internships are now becoming a super important role. So I feel like before in the old days, right, you could have, let's say, a good college degree and that would lead you to get towards a good internship. However, now that's not always the case. And internships are a very fickle thing in that if you have better connections, you can typically get some sort of internship, and that internship can then cause you to receive a job offer. So the idea is your junior year summer, you do an internship, and then when you graduate, you receive a job offer from that place you did an internship at, and they say, hey, come work for us full time. What we're seeing now is that a lot of companies are like, hey, we want people with actual skills. And so they do double filtering in that they'll filter for top colleges. They'll also filter for who has done an internship at a reputable company. So now you have double levels of status in the sense of okay, college level status of did you go to a top university? And then also internship status, did you go to, let's say, a good company and get a good internship? And then that is signaling to us you are actually capable, you're competent, all these other things that I think college used to do, but now people are realizing college is common, so they're trying to differentiate again and looking at top jobs come from top internships. However, college is still relatively connected to that, and the fact that top colleges provide you with not a lot of things, but enough things, and that they provide you with a network of people. The chance of you meeting an extremely successful person at a top college is much higher. Just walking around, the chance is just much higher than at any other colleges. And so as a result, you have a higher network, and there's more likely that somebody in that network is going to work at a top company, and that top company is going to be used to, hiring a lot of students from this top college, and they're going to have that as a status quo and a precedent, right? Just like how in high school, when people apply to colleges, certain high schools will always send quite a few people to good colleges. And those colleges will know and recognize those high schools as high achieving high schools. And those would be targets in their head. So then when the colleges go to those high schools or when they see people applying, they know that, okay, typically these people are pretty good. They just keep it in the back of their head. Same thing with internships with colleges, right? So top colleges, if you're coming from top colleges, they have that in the back of your head. And then you're usually able to connect with somebody who works there, and they usually recruit a lot pretty heavily from there. And so where's it going to go in the future? I think really what college is at this point, I know I've taken a long time to kind of get to this point here, but top colleges are worth it in the sense that you get brand name and you get network connections and you get alumni network. I would say out of the hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans people pay for top colleges, those three things are really all you're paying for. I would argue that the education you receive is nothing special. The physical education you receive, the physical classes, yes, they may have some interesting structured classes, but it's not like they have the best teachers in every single category. They have very accomplished professors in that those professors have won Nobel Prizes. But let me ask you a question. If somebody has won a Nobel Prize, does that mean they're very good at explaining, or does that mean they're just super smart? Usually it just means they're super smart. And a lot of times we conflict the two when you think that if somebody's super smart, they'll be really good at explaining. But that's actually not the truth. In fact, it's often the opposite. I've had personal experience where a lot of really talented professors are teaching my classes, but they're just absolutely really struggle to explain well to students for first-time concepts. And this is something we have to detach from reality. Just because you have somebody who is a Nobel Prize laureate doesn't mean they know how to explain basic chemistry to people. Doesn't mean they know how to explain all the complexities of basic chemistry in a way that would make sense to the average person. So if you take that into account, now it's oh, okay, so most of my education, and this is also from personal experience, is kind of self-learning. You'll get a textbook, Your professor will be there. They'll explain stuff very briefly for a couple hours a week, and the amount of stuff you're supposed to know is way beyond those couple hours, right? So you have to either read the textbook yourself or do what most people do and just go on YouTube and search a bunch of videos of how to to explain it and how to learn it. So what are they doing? They're spending all this money to go and receive an education, but what are they actually learning? The stuff they're paying for is actually the network of people and who they could potentially meet there. That's what you're paying for. You're not really paying to learn something, because you can learn, like I said before, all you want on the internet. Even if I don't care where you are, you're watching this, that means you're on YouTube or on some sort of social media platform. You can search up all the videos you want about any topic. And this is also where we get into computer science and coding. Computer science and coding has to be probably one of the easiest ways to directly self-learn into a job that is actually very, very skill-based. How do you get in a job? Typically, you have to do interviews that are skill-based and that you have to do some coding during the interview. How can you learn coding? You can go to a top school and they'll teach you, right? Or you can just watch the thousands and thousands and thousands of tutorials that can explain all the nuances of all the concepts, all on YouTube for free, not even having to pay anything. And what's the result? It's pretty much the same. Now, I will acknowledge that if you go to a top college, you will have the brand name, which will help you get into, top, internships and jobs. But at the same time, if you have that brand name and you can't code, it doesn't matter how much this brand name helps. You won't be able to get in. So there still is a heavy skill factor. So I think that what we're seeing now is a lot of people who are unsure of what they want to do, getting college degrees because they think that's the default, which is fine. But they're not learning any actual skills. And when they go to employers, they're not getting the best internship opportunities because either they don't have connections or they're also not at a top college, so they're not getting the benefits of a better network. And as a result, you're stuck with paying quite a bit for college tuition. And in my opinion, you should only be paying that much if you're really getting the brand name where it's like a stamp of approval. Wherever you go, if you can say, I'm from Harvard, I'm from Stanford, that just makes people pop, right? And that is definitely worth the money. But if you're going to just a school that doesn't have that same level of recognition, the cost in some cases is almost identical. If you look at a lot of private colleges all across the US, the private college cost is actually almost the same for any college that's private. And the truth of the matter is they're not the same in ranking, they're not the same in prestige. So you're paying the same amount to get a lower brand quality, lower prestige. And of course, it's very difficult to get into the top schools. I recognize that. But I'm just pointing out how this can cause an issue, because now if you, let's say, don't have that level of prestige from your college, and so you don't get the better opportunities and don't get the better jobs, now you can't necessarily pay back the debt that you accumulated from going into college, assuming that it was the best choice for you. And again, maybe for most people, the alternative is much, worse, like not going to college, than is to just go to college. But it doesn't mean that going to college is a flawless approach to ensure that you will be successful in any aspect. And that's something I think I've definitely not seen. In fact, the reality of the situation is that college was the idea that would lead you to your job. And there are a lot of people who are much younger and who are, just either starting college as a freshman or, just are still in high school, who are getting jobs because they're extremely talented, extremely skilled, and, are able to actually either build things or have this level of skill set that is really just, revolutionary in a sense. And so that's really flipping things on its head. For example, there are freshmen getting the kinds of opportunities currently at Stanford that are typically, you would think, are reserved for juniors and seniors, because these are literal full-time job offers that they are getting. And so if you think about it, if you were originally so stuck in this timeline of oh no, I need to go to college, the first 2 years I'll learn stuff, and then my third year I'll get an internship, then I'll get a return offer of that to get a job. Well, there are people who are their first year getting that job. So now it makes you understand, okay, the timeline is not what's important. It doesn't matter if I do this first, do this second, do this third. It's, do you have the skills? Do you actually, are able to do the thing very, very well? Because that's what a lot of these tech companies, I'm specifically talking about tech companies because that's typically what I've seen just from my friends and things. But those companies are really focused on that skill set thing. And if you have that, they're allowing you to just jump to the last level. And that's kind of showing you that college is having, a smaller and smaller kind of effect for employment, in that it once was a really rare thing and is gradually become extremely common. And as a result, people also understand that it's not the best proxy for if somebody's actually a good worker, Because just because they come from a top college, they're going to look for that internship. And that internship, what does it signal? It signals you have hands-on skills. So now if we circumvent college and we decide, okay, how can I get the hands-on skills that will lead to the job directly, that will let me actually be efficient and effective, and I can prove that in my interviews, then given with the fact that college doesn't update its curriculum very fast, it doesn't keep up with the modern times very well for most cases, you can start to understand how college is kind of being squeezed out, and a lot of people now are taking a different route. It doesn't mean it's for you. It doesn't mean you have to like stop doing your college or whatever. It doesn't mean you don't have to go to college. But I'm just opening this up because this is definitely a reality I'm seeing in a lot of my friends and a lot of other people, in that you're at a top school, you reap a lot of these benefits, but one of those benefits is not what you're learning in classes. It's who you're meeting. It's the effect of the university's brand name that you have and then you can attach to yourself that can make you seem more valuable to other people, and that helps with your employment chances. But at the end of the day, that's really all you're paying for. So I just don't want you guys to get, very like confused, because I think a lot of people are very confused. And to be honest, in my personal opinion, if you are not in, let's say, one of the top 100 colleges in the US, and let's say you're not trying to go into medicine, you're not going into law, which require undergraduate degrees, and you want to go into an industry that's very skills-based, like computer science, either business or marketing, and also those industries where technically college professors may not be the most experienced people to teach you how to do certain things. For example, if I learn business from a college professor, I want that professor to have started multiple businesses and be successful and tell me exactly what they learned from that. I don't want them to have just studied a bunch of economic theory and tell me what should work, but have no practical applications. If you combine all those together, you may be better off trying to figure out things more on your own. And when I say on your own, it's in air quotes, because you have the entire internet, the entire YouTube, the entire minds of greatest people online. Also, you have a wealth of just books you can read as well, and kind of do the similar thing you might actually end up doing at university and save yourself a lot of money and just focus on directly building your skill set without the intermediary of college in between. So that's my kind of spiel about college on the old, current, and future of it. I just want to share kind of my thoughts from attending a top school for the past 2 years. This is going to be part 1. We're going to have much more coming in this series. Make sure you leave a comment and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.